All right, welcome back to another edition of the Wolverine.com podcast, our video version with Doug Karsch, the voice of Michigan football. It still kind of gets to me, man. It's unbelievable. Hearing you on WTKA back in the day and being a nervous caller, which I laugh about now. Oh, my God, I hope I don't sound stupid with Doug Karsch, you know.
Well,
So,
are you still worried about it?
I am, because you still have the cassette tapes with my voice on there, you know.
Yeah,
I'm worried you might be.
We got them somewhere.
Yeah, you do. I remember I used my voice for a couple promos, and I thought I hit the big time.
Yeah.
So, but
Only we knew better. Only we knew better back then. We might have not let you get out of the cage.
Right. That's a good point. So I do remember one time when I just started there, my first trip to Columbus, I think it was 2000. And you were on the air. I was driving home and you said, he goes, that's not a place for the faint hearted. Michigan fan down there. And he goes, who's going to come back in a pine box is Chris Balas. I remember and that was classic. And we almost did. But you know what? They were not happy after that game. But they're more miserable now, Doug. And it's a beautiful thing.
You make friends all over the Big Ten, Chris.
I have, absolutely. But especially in Columbus and East Lansing. So, it's been bizarre. But, Doug, I appreciate you joining us. It's crazy. Now, here's the crazy part, folks. Started 2 years ago. In 2 years, right, Doug Karsch has lost one game, the TCU game. And of course, what everybody wants to know is that your fault, that game?
So, yes, I take full blame for that.
They could have had
a funny story about that game. It was third quarter and things weren't going well. And I was being a mopey baby and just kind of bad body language and sulking during a commercial break. And Brian Bush, who does pre-games and halftime post and hosts the podcast and does Michigan basketball, came up during a commercial break and put his arm around me and said, what a wonderful story this will be. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're right. This comeback's going to be fantastic. And then after that, I believe right up until the last snap on the last play of the game, which is one of my worst calls ever. But honestly, been very fortunate to be able to have this kind of getting to call so many wins. It's a lot easier job when they're playing well, and they've played extraordinarily well. My oldest son just graduated from Michigan, and I pointed out to him and his classmates at their grad party, you guys just lived probably the best era of Michigan football since Fielding H. Yost.
Yes.
And, Bo versus Woody, there was great success, but you didn't lose to Ohio State your whole college career. You won 3 Big Ten titles. You went to 3 college football playoffs. They get a national championship in their senior year. You mix in the fact that they went to 3 Frozen Fours. I mean, these kids that just graduated are completely spoiled with what they got to do and experience in their time at Michigan.
And it kind of reminds me of Doug Skene and his 5 Big Ten championships that I got to live vicariously through him, And Skene, what a surprise. Thank you. Thanks for joining us here.
Well, my 3 o'clock meeting was shorter than I thought, so I thought I'd jump in on the conversation here. So thanks for having me.
I bet it didn't take you 20 minutes to get on like it took Doug Karsch to figure it out. You know why? Because you went to Michigan, and Michigan men are a little bit more inclined to be technically sound.
Yeah, he's harsh on you, Karsch.
It's nothing new.
Because I know there's a short joke coming or something.
It's nothing new. I can start with the height jokes anytime you want.
Exactly. So I got to get mine in now, right? And then I'll mention about how I have more hair than the two of you, 2 Dougs combined, and then
not as much as you used to.
What's that? I got it cut.
As much as you used to.
I got it cut. That's why.
So did I.
Yeah, I know it. Now, one day, look at you guys. It's fantastic. So too bad that the people listening to this can't see it. So anyway, Skene, thanks for joining us as well. Doug Skene now is on with us, folks, and 5-time Big Ten champion. And we were just talking about how the TCU game is the only one that Doug lost and how it was his fault. But what an era, Doug. And we were considering going back to 1988 when you first arrived, I believe it was 88, 89. Yeah, 92. I mean, there's not been a better era of Michigan football than the 3 years we just witnessed, has there?
No. And listen, when we were there from 88 to 92, we looked back at the eras, obviously, that preceded us because that was the expectation that we were going to try to meet, right? And then the teams that I was fortunate to be a part of, we won all those Big Ten championships, 5 in a row, 4 of them outright, all the Rose Bowls and all that. And that was a new standard. Then the 97 team happened. That was the greatest team I had ever seen play before me or after us. And then flash forward through some dark years. Balas, you and I watched it close. I know you did the same, Doug. Dark years. Probably the lowest point was the Wisconsin game at home during the COVID year, where I just think that was about as bad as I've ever seen it. It's certainly bad as I've ever seen it. And then the evolution that happened with Coach Harbaugh, that roster, the players, the attitude, and then, Hutch and Ajabo and that group and that team hit some sort of reset button. And leading up to that, we had always heard in January, oh, this year's going to be different. We're going to do different things, and this team's different, and yet it wasn't. But those guys said the same thing, and that it clearly was different.
Yeah.
And it's been different ever since, and they took the program to heights to, ultimately the best team that's ever worn the uniform.
Yeah, and your buddy
was awesome to watch.
Your buddy Chris Hutchinson, his son Aidan was one of the ones that turned it around. And Doug and I were talking about this, and he said he kind of changed the standard here. That off season, and those guys, it was kind of a player-led thing, right, Doug? Where Aidan Hutchinson said, "This isn't happening again on my watch," and you could see it on his face when they got beat. I believe it was by Indiana, or when they got destroyed by Ohio State that one year, and he was just disgusted, and it hurt him, and it meant more to him. So, but those guys really changed the culture of this program. Doug, is that 2021 game similar to the 1969 game in that respect? That Ohio State game that year?
It could be. I mean, look, here's what's funny about the 2021 game and season, because believe it or not, I listened to your podcasts for Skene, of course. Yeah. And Skene, that entire season, I remember you being, yeah, but still, you got to show me. Mm-hmm. And I remember your skepticism all throughout, and it was justified. And I'd always kind of see as the season went on, is Skene sold yet? Is Skene sold yet? And you really weren't until it was all said and done, which you completely understood. That 2021 season and that 2021 group, I still hear the players now talk about accountability and talk about where the standard needs to be. And going into that year, I don't know, it might have, honestly, the person to credit might be Chris Hutchinson, who taught Aidan. And when Aidan became a leader, Aidan held everybody that high standard. And you got to be the right player, right? You have to be a leader that everybody gets behind. You have to be either a great player or one that everybody respects. Mm-hmm. And it really did change things. And of course, the euphoria of that Ohio State win. But then they didn't rest on their laurels, right? They came back the next year willing to prove it again. And then this past season, you're talking about a generation of players that now removed from Aidan Hutchinson that are continuing that standard that he set. And it wasn't just Aidan Hutchinson, but he was clearly the leader of that group. But that class, that team, has left a legacy that's echoed here the last couple of years.
And legacy.
And the other thing I would add to that,
yeah,
in what last year's team did, right? We got to remember the one thing that can't be forgotten is what last year's team did in the face of external milling, if you will, by the removal of their head coach and all the distractions in this era of time, in where guys are so connected with their phones and their pockets and the social media and everything, for these guys to keep it together the way they did, and that staff is still jaw-dropping to me, and the way they did it. And it's just a layer of hardened steel on top of that team is the greatest team to ever wear the uniform in Michigan. Yeah. That they did what they did in spite of the fact that they ripped their head coach from their sideline the night before the biggest game of the year at the time at Penn State. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was. And a $4 million budget, too, by the way. I was talking to the guys in the collectives, and they said the salary cap for that team, Karsch, $4 million. They hope to operate with $11.5 million this year. But that just goes to show you how much it meant to these guys to come back, right? They could have gone somewhere else. They could have gotten, like 5-6 guys could have gotten $1 million each, probably, or at least $750,000, right?
Who knows? Because the numbers that are floated out there,
crazy. You're right.
It behooves programs to let the rumors fly that they're paying players.
Yeah.
And that Jaden Rashada got $13 million. Yeah. Whether he was ever going to get that or not, it didn't hurt Florida. They weren't going to go tell people that's not true. And that's what's so weird about this era of college football is you have, and I'm going to tell you that I think it's mostly parents promised by representatives of other schools that this is what your kid is going to get here. And there's no truth to it whatsoever.
Right.
But they believe that the offer's true. And it's in their, everybody's looking out for their own best interests.
Yep.
And so this, the nature of what's going on now, and it was up to Sherrone more this year to convince players, hey, look, you be careful with what you're hearing.
Yeah.
Don't always believe it because it's not always true. The grass isn't always greener. Heck, we've seen a player leave and come back already.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just, it's bizarre. It's hard to follow. But when the games are played on Saturdays, there's still nothing better.
Right.
Like, there's still not, like, I keep all the outside noise and the rapidly changing game and the budgets and the false reports of what players are getting. And it can all, the conference expansion, which I don't love, and the death of the Pac-12, which I don't love. And yet on Saturday, when the games roll around from they're coming to our city at 9 a.m. through that last formally Pac-12 game wrapping up at 1 a.m. Sunday morning, I love every second of it.
That we are usually watching on a bye week from 9 a.m. until 3 in the morning. At least did that a couple of times.
Hey, is that the kid, Doug? Is that the kid that's suing down there in Florida?
Yes.
Yeah, that reminds me because Balas told me that he promised me like $14 million for these podcasts, and I didn't get it. So I'm thinking about filing a lawsuit against Balas.
Well, there people are filing lawsuits now, right? Was it the NC State basketball team?
Yeah,
the championship team is filing a lawsuit for their name, image, and likeness going back to 1983. How is that possible?
I don't know, but I actually went from hating the Rashada lawsuit to loving it.
Yeah,
because there's accountability. You can't just go around promising people the sun and the moon when you don't even own the county. Like, how can you offer all this stuff that you don't have? Right. So now it maybe puts the brakes a little bit on some of the false promises that have been out there. And, the fact that Michigan in this offseason, correct me if I'm wrong, lost one player that was expected to be a major contributor next year.
Probably DJ Waller and Keon.
Yeah, that's true. They lost Saab before the spring and Waller afterwards.
Yep.
But it is actually pretty remarkable because the roster was poised to get plucked. And one of the first things Sherrone had to do was hold that team together. Yep. And he did. He did. And
the parents tell me that they got him at a discount, some of these guys, because they want to finish their careers here and finish what they started. So there's still work to do. And hopefully guys like Doug Skene won't be suing for those dozens of dollars they're owed for their contributions in the 1990s. That would just get ugly. We don't want that, Doug.
Hey, listen, I'd be gladly, just some free golf at U of M. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Balance out. I'll take that.
Well, you've gotten some free golf at Tullymore. You've gotten some free golf up north with Doug Karsch. It's some great courses.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But I want to get paid Michigan for my time, for all that wonderful stuff we did, right? A couple 3 rounds across the street at the golf course. I'll settle for that.
All right, that works. Thinking back to those lean years that we were just talking about, and Karsch. You and I have gone back and forth about the memories. And when we're kids, it's the most important thing to you. You remember every play of every game, and you've watched it so many times that you know what's coming up on third down and stuff like that. Have you kind of erased 2008 through 2014 from your mind, with maybe the exception of 2011? There are things that come up where people ask me about a game or a score, and I'm like, I don't remember that happening. It's unbelievable. And it's not fair to those kids because they all wore the uniform, but God, that was some terrible football.
It was rough. I mean, the Rich Rod era, they recruited a level of player that offensively was dynamic, and a lot of those kids, it meant a lot to them. So I hate downgrading their efforts because I saw, tears in the locker room after games. But the defense got worse. I mean, there was at one point where Michigan had 17 wide receivers on scholarship and 3 walk-ons starting on defense. Yeah. They had like 7 scholarship offensive linemen.
Yeah.
But they had 17 wide receivers, and it was just such a weird time. And Brady Hoke, God bless him, is one of the best dudes you will ever meet. Mm-hmm. And he is an elite defensive line coach. And it was one of my all-time favorite coaches at Michigan. It didn't work out as a head coach at a major college level. It doesn't mean he's not a great dude and a great coach and always a supporter of Michigan, but those eras were tough. And then the hiccups in the Harbaugh era, some were a product of some bad luck. And some, I think Jim had to figure things out a little bit at the collegiate level. And I think early in the Harbaugh, this is my theory exclusively. I think early in the Harbaugh era, he was recruiting where he was waving the NFL flag. I'll get you to the NFL.
Yeah.
And he got players that were focused on getting to the NFL.
Yeah.
But when it came to what mattered to Aidan Hutchinson and here, winning for Michigan, I think that might have been lacking a little bit. And Jim and the staff got back to that. And maybe some hires that didn't work out. The staff is so important. It is so important what staff you put together. And so do I remember the third down from the Indiana game in the COVID year no, I don't. I've wiped a lot of that out, but the bottom line is, Michigan football needed a reset and they got it.
In hindsight, Skene, that COVID year was really kind of a throwaway year, right? None of that really mattered. And if we go back and we look at how many practices were halted and how many times they had to stop practice, how many guys opted out of the season, how many guys couldn't play in games or couldn't practice for 2 weeks, in other words, that Michigan State loss doesn't really count, right?
Well, in the record book, it is what it is. Yeah. But the reality is the COVID year, whatever. Yeah. But for me, the COVID year, man, on paper would have been, numerically the worst. But those Rich Rod years and the clunky years with Brady, those were painful because we saw football players out there. There just wasn't the normal collective. Doug talked about 17 scholarship wideouts and barely 5 offensive linemen that would ever really, traditionally start on a Michigan offensive line, with all due respect to those guys. But there wasn't a focus on the trenches. And that turned Michigan football into something that has never been successful really anywhere in football, let alone at Michigan. That's the dark era that I remember, watching guys and just going, how is this even possible that this is our lineup, right, at Michigan? And yet it was the case. So it culminated in that COVID year when things hit rock bottom and Jim found a way to reinvent himself and his staff and refocus things, and all that magic potion, whatever was put together in that building. It happened. Thank God it happened, because that was, a 10-year stretch, 12-year stretch where we were flat out not even competitive against our rivals and struggled to beat Indiana and other teams in the Big Ten. That was bad.
Yeah, as Kirk Herbstreit said, Mike Martin and a bunch of nice little players for Indiana, I think was his quote on defense. Yeah. And I was looking at the roster and I'm like, God, he's probably right. With the exception of Jordan Kovacs, which is crazy, So, Doug, your thoughts on Sherrone more? To me, it was the only hire. It was the right hire, and I really have a lot of respect for this guy, the way he operates, who he is, the family man he is. Not just that, though, but the kind of coach he is, and not making any excuses this year. You can sense there's a confidence about him that, we lost all these guys, but we're still going to win. And was there any other option, in your opinion, that any other direction they could have gone than Sherrone after Jim left?
I was ecstatic they kept Sherrone, because I don't know that people realize. You think that, it was just Jim Harbaugh's team and you can't credit Sherrone for those wins. And I go back to Ohio State, when they had an interim coach, they went 6-6, and there was absolutely Sherrone's fingerprints and keeping the train on the tracks. I watched that man during those games be the head coach, be the O-line coach, and be the offensive coordinator all at the same time, which isn't easy to do. And there was a sequence of plays in the Ohio State game, and I think it is incredibly interesting. The 2 4th downs on the 1 scoring drive, where the first play, because of Ohio State's defense, they audibled into a handoff to Blake Corum, and he dove over for the first down. 3 plays later, they got another 4th and 1. They line up and call the exact same play, but based on Ohio State's defense. And you can see it on the first 4th down. There was a corner that was leaking out to the flat on the short side of the field, or the field side, not the boundary side, the field side, that took away Colston Loveland. JJ checks into the handoff to Blake, first down. Next time, 3 plays later, they called the exact same play, but this time the ball was on the right hash and the corner was cheating in. And JJ looked at that, snapped the ball, and hit Colston Loveland for a first down. And there was a chess moment in this where I'm like, this is next level play calling. And the guys that were running the play knew what they were doing. and it's the same play. It's just they looked at the defense, said, okay, the handoff works here. The second time they looked at it, said the pass works here. And I that sequence, I thought to me that here's a guy that has full command of what he's doing offensively. And Michigan got in on this guy when he's young. Now, it's his show now. It's completely different when it's your show. And over the next few years, he's going to be met with some challenges. He already has with some guys that he had to let go. But being the head coach, I asked him about this before the spring game, and he goes, it's amazing how little of this job is about football now. It's he's the CEO, and as an assistant coach, it's almost all X's and O's and recruiting, and it's all football. As the head coach, it's different. So you have to hire the right guys, delegate to them, and they make a lot of the important decisions for you, the way Sherrone did last year for Jim Harbaugh.
And I like the way that he and Kirk Campbell work together. And Skene, if you watch that ECU game, for example, when I think Sherrone Moore was the head coach in that game, if I'm not mistaken, Kirk Campbell, the OC. And I thought the adjustments were fantastic. It was clear that ECU was going to take away the running game, and how Michigan adjusted was great. I have a lot of faith in Kirk Campbell as well. But there's something that excites me. If they can figure out the recruiting aspect of it and the NIL, right? I think Sherrone Moore is an elite recruiter, and we've heard recruits like Jalen Williams, for example, who just committed, say, I so badly wanted to play for this guy, right? And then they went through that whole fiasco with the defensive line coaches and Greg Scruggs, and Sherrone said, trust me. He said, listen, don't go anywhere else yet. Don't commit yet. Just trust me. We'll get a guy in here. He brings in Lou Esposito. The kid really likes him, and of course, he loves Sherrone Moore. So, your expectations, though, Skene, in year one, and I want to talk about the quarterbacks first, because this is obviously mine and many other people's concern, is there a guy with this elite defense, and I think it's going to be elite. Wink Martindale told me, Karsch, just the other day in a one-on-one interview, that there are 9 to 11 NFL guys on this roster right now on defense. 9 to 11. That's almost the entire side of the ball, right? So, but are they going to waste it because they don't have a good quarterback? And Skene, your thoughts on what you've seen there?
Well, there's talent in the room, right? And talent is part of the equation for success. But ultimately, you want to get to that scenario that Doug just described, when that quarterback, whoever it may be, gets to that line of scrimmage. You can see things before they happen. You'd be able to look at a corner or a safety or a linebacker as a quarterback and see, okay, I need to check into this or check out of that. I need to fluidly tell my offensive line and everything so we can get underneath the play clock and get this thing off, and there's no questions. It's a long way to get to with very little experience, because you have to have gone through these things in game situations to understand it. And you can do it in practice a million times, and they do, as much as practice time allows, and walkthroughs and everything else. How fast can we get that guy, whether it be Orgy or Tuttle or whoever it's going to be in there? How can we get that guy to that level to run this offense that Coach Moore is going to sustain and tweak and do whatever he's going to do? So that's big challenge number one. It's the biggest question mark coming into this season. And then for Sherrone himself, Doug, you mentioned how much of this, Coach Sherrone talks about how much of this job is little to do with football now. He's got to coach his coaches as much as he's got to coach his roster. He's got to develop all these young guys he's got in his team. I think a Grant over there in the offensive line coach, this is his first crack at this thing. It's a big job. I fully think he's capable, but we have to go through it. You got to get through the walls to find out how you stand when you crash through them. I think they're going to do well, but there's going to be some parts where you stub your toe. And I think the good news about that is a stub toe nowadays does not eliminate you from the discussion at the end of the season. So the new structure and the playoff system and everything else helps when you are not rebuilding, but resetting the roster to go chase the same trophy that you just got.
I'm going to come back to the quarterbacks in a second, but since on that subject, Doug, Karsch is 9-3, good enough to get them into the playoff this year.
Yes.
LSU was 13 last year at 9-3, but with this schedule, I think 9-3 gets them in, don't you?
Yeah, and it's actually I don't know what the new playoff is going to feel like. I love the week in, week out intensity of what college football was. I thought it was the best regular season in all of sports, because every Saturday you could count on 2 or 3 games that had national championship implications. And I wanted to watch those games because the intensity was so high. There is going to be a dilution of that importance from game 1 to game 12. But if you're going to do it, this might be the best year for Michigan to do it, because they're not. This team wouldn't run the table. This team I wouldn't think of would have a great chance to make the playoff under the old format. Under the new format, they have an outstanding chance to make it. And if you play a tough schedule like this and you lose 3 games, I mean, depending on how else, you don't know how the other, top 15 teams in the country or what their seasons are going to look like. But I think on the surface, yes, 9-3 gets you into the playoff.
You got your wish here, Doug. All these years, Karsch, you were saying, I hate and last year sucked. Let's be honest. Those first 3 games, it was just like, let's just get this shit over with. Right. And I'm sorry, just to be blunt,
check the box.
Exactly. Let's get out of halftime. Even the Bowling Green game, it could have been, it was a terrible game, whatever. They didn't play well, but you knew they were going to win it. It's just like, let's fast forward. So Skene playing in those games, though, and going back to when you played Miami of Florida, Florida State, Notre Dame, it's better, right?
Yeah, it's from a player's perspective, because that energy starts early in the week, man. It starts on Sunday, it starts on Monday, and you're just anticipating, and it's such an emotional high by the time you get to Saturday morning, Friday night at the hotel. It is definitely a different feel than when you've got Wake Forest on the calendar there, like we did one year. And listen, these are still young guys. I guarantee you, when these dudes sit and they look at their iPhones or they're in the team meeting room and you look at that roster of your schedule up there, they're not fired up about the Arkansas State game as much as they are the Texas and the USC game.
Yeah,
they're just not, right? They're young guys, and they see the names up there just like we do. Yep. And so it is a real thing. And but I think it helps, right? Last year, but it was just painful. It was chicken sandwich all the way till late October. What are we doing here? I got golf to go play. How'd the game go? Okay, great, super. Call me when it gets to be November, right? That Penn State game. That's when it got exciting. That won't be the case this year because of all the questions early in the season. There'll be a lot of hype around that Fresno game because all the new faces on the field. We'll all be watching intently. And then, of course, in week 2, all right, you got one of the premier quarterbacks in college football coming to town. And college football is a quarterback game. And let's see how we stack up and how our quarterback stacks up in that moment.
Michigan's going to win that game. We'll come back to that Texas game. Did I send you that picture, by the way, of that table of chicken sandwiches outside the Washington locker room?
I think you did.
Did you laugh? I hope you laughed, because that was a really good moment for me. When Doug Skene always says, you get watch these guys demoralized, get their chicken sandwich, and you can't wait to get to the bus, Karsch. That's his big thing. And there was that table of chicken sandwiches, and damn it, there was a Snickers bar in there too. And I laughed my ass off. So I have a picture of that. So Karsch, is Orgy the guy? And I talked to, talking to some of the guys that coach. It's interesting because everybody's got a different opinion, including some of the guys on the team. We dropped off some national championship books and magazines over at the Champion Circle and a nice check for them because we gave them a portion of the proceeds. And one of the players who's going to be starting on defense this year asked us who we thought was going to be the starting quarterback. And I think we all said Alex Orgy. And he goes, man, I don't know. He says, keep an eye on Jack Tuttle. He said last year he had a great practices. And he said, this guy's been around a long time. He's been playing around behind some good quarterbacks. One of his teammates who's going to be starting on offense agreed with him. But everybody, I think, assumes it's going to be Alex Orgy. What are your thoughts on this competition?
Well, I mean, not seeing Jack Tuttle in the spring certainly can shape public opinion. Here's the thing about it. You can't. I mean, he backed up the 2 quarterbacks that played for the national championship last year.
Right.
Are you kidding me? So he could be way better than anybody knows. We just haven't had a chance to see it. Being the guy that's behind J.J. McCarthy doesn't mean you're a bad player. It just means you're not quite as good as J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix prior to that. If he was transferring, if he chose where he went based on potential playing time, he chose very poorly because he was behind these 2 guys. But I don't know what his motivation was. I got to know his family a little bit and like them. So, yeah, I don't think Jack Tuttle is out of the question as possibly the starter. But that's the thing about it is I think you'll see Tuttle and Orgy against Fresno State, which is, something could happen between now and then that might change that. But I could totally see these guys splitting time against Fresno State and them kind of holding their cards close to the vest going into the Texas game. In fact, if you want a prediction, that's what I predict happens. Split snaps against Fresno and they don't announce a starter for the Texas game.
Yep, you heard it here first. Doug Karsch wants Jack Tuttle because he has friends with their parents. With the parents, no. All right, that's not true. It is interesting though, guys. Davis Warren. We were talking to Kirk Campbell, and Kirk Campbell said Davis Warren has better throwing mechanics than anybody they've had on the roster in the last 5 years, including JJ McCarthy. Now, one parent said they lined him up, and everybody's like, I said Davis Warren has an NFL arm, and people on the message board skewered me. You know, Big Blue Stud 152 said I'm the biggest moron since, whoever. And one of the parents told me they lined up and they were doing their long ball throw, and Davis Warren out threw JJ McCarthy by 10 yards. Now, as we've all seen with Joe Milton and Demetrius Brown and guys with huge arms, that doesn't necessarily make a great quarterback, but this guy can make all the throws. What's it going to take for a guy like that to see the field? Either one of you clowns.
Oh, well, clown.
Yeah.
Here we go with the clown talk again, Balas.
Having flashbacks to the golf course?
Yes, I am. Well, step one has already been done in the spring. Obviously, he's raised the eyebrows with that arm of his to a degree. And then you got to do it in fall camp, and then I'm assuming we're going to see him too, because the rules allow for it, right? And there's enough room in that schedule early in the season, maybe even that opener against Fresno. Maybe he gets a series or two. When the moment comes, he's got to hit the ball where it needs to be hit, right? It's a baseball reference, but what I mean is the spots, the right breakdown, the right target in the right spot with the football, and continue the momentum to get himself on the football field. I think this absolutely could be a 3-person race.
Karsch, your thoughts? Does he have any shot?
Yeah, he does. And certainly I don't think you're a moron for saying that Davis Warren has that. I think you're a moron for a variety of other reasons.
I understand.
But
Morons, but that's more appropriate than clown, right? We were called clown. Balas is a moron. Yeah.
But I mean, you talk about a guy that has had his share of, he's had a steep climb to get where he's got, losing, a season to battling cancer, coming back and then having a COVID year. How this guy has even made it to where he is now is incredible. And it speaks to his talent and his ability. It also speaks to a toughness that could be a factor come fourth quarter of a big game. I mean, the fight that he has had to get where he is today speaks a lot about who Davis Warren is as a person. So get him in a fourth quarter of a tight game, and maybe Davis Warren can, tap into the fight that he has shown just to get here. And he could really be an asset and a player for this team. So, no, do not count him out.
There's the bell, isn't it? It's kind of like pardon the interruption or whatever it is. Next topic. So we'll just do a couple more here, guys. I know you're both busy. And clowns, by the way, to me, is a term of endearment, which I had to convince John Borton of when he got this fire in his eyes as we were pounding them on the golf course. And he's like, I'm going to let this literally golf clown here. You look at me, you might as well put the gesture hat on, right? As you both know. And John Borton's like, I can't believe I'm losing to this guy. It's like a Michael Dukakis moment, Saturday Night Live. So anyway, but it is a term of endearment, and I appreciate both of you being here, honestly. So, but defensively, you look at the talent here, and I think there are two areas, right? Backup linebacker and interior defensive line depth that are really, in fact, Wink Martindale kind of talked about the interior line depth a little bit. They struck out on a couple of these guys that they were going for in the portal, but overall, this defense could be just as good as the last couple of years on paper, right?
Well, maybe they struck out because of the guys that are on the roster, specifically in the middle, right? With that trio that we're going to have, and you get Rayshon Benny back in there, in that mix, that interior, that defense, I feel for those guys in practice, having to try to block those dudes day in, day out. Ultimately, it will help them. But when you start off in the middle of your defense with two guys in the middle that you're going to have a very hard time blocking, the success bleeds out from there.
And Karsch, the four guys that were on the field at the end of that Alabama game are the four guys that are going to be starting. And they had two chances on timeouts to substitute those guys out, and they did not. And that spoke volumes to me. And I thought, wow. And then you see Josiah Stewart make the play of the year when he knocks a 350-pound All-American offensive lineman who's going to be a first-round pick, if he wasn't already, into the quarterback to make the play, and Derek Moore there to clean it up, right? So that excites me. You can win a lot of ball games that way. Is this going to be one of those games where you think it's going to be, if they're going to beat these better teams on the schedule, it's going to be low-scoring wins like the old days?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's They lost so much offensively. And like the worst case scenario is that they're a Donovan Edwards, Colston Loveland injury away from being Iowa, right? I mean, that they really have a lot of guys with a lot to prove offensively. Certainly, I think they have a lot more to work with just from a talent perspective than Iowa did last year, but it's young and unproven. There are guys in it now, instead of being the guy next to the man or the guy next to the guys, Samaj Morgan's got to be the guy, right? And so you have to, and keep this in mind, that Iowa team last year won the Big Ten West, and that resume might have got them in the playoff under this format. So you have to be, they have to be dominant on the defensive side of the ball. I think they're perfectly capable of that. One of my favorite players on defense is a guy who hasn't played much yet, but you mentioned depth at linebacker. Jaden Hood had a great line last year when somebody said, hey, you've kind of been around, you haven't played, a lot of people in your situation would transfer. And he said, yeah, when I sleep at night and I have dreams of playing football, I'm always wearing a winged helmet. And I'm like, that's a guy who, it means, you get a sense for how much it means to him. And I don't count kids like that out. Like, I think that's a player to look out for. I think Jimmy Rolder's got a lot of potential and, can learn battle with injuries last year, but just to mention, but what you said, but yeah, I mean, this could be a year that they do it completely differently than they did a year ago. But I've seen that happen with teams that are at the top of college football. You just roll over to the next year and you find a way. You play to your strengths. And this year, this team's strengths, it's going to be the defense.
I do like the fact that they got a kicker, Dominic Zvada, out of Arkansas State. That was a concern, obviously, after the spring game. Brandon Kornblue did tell me Adam Samaha still has a future here. He worked with him this summer, thinks he's going to improve, and he'll be in the mix. Obviously, he's a scholarship guy, so that'll help. Special teams and defense are going to have to be really, really good. He did say some really nice things about J.B. Brown, too, who he's worked with in the past, so that made me feel better. When you're replacing a guy like Jay Harbaugh, who had great success here, with an unknown analyst and everybody's saying, oh, they just promoted and it was so easy. This guy's had experience at Texas Southern. Brandon Kornblue told me he ran into him. He was just at a Los Angeles Rams camp and was invited there. And J.B. Brown was there just to learn in the offseason as an analyst. So I feel pretty good about that too. So it's going to be interesting, fellas, but it's going to be exciting. Can't wait for that opener. I don't wish my summers away anymore, Karsch, like we used to back when you were pretending to be Rick Leach on your bike with the hair flowing in the wind, like your mom used to tell me. But you know what? When that day comes, it's going to be exciting. Last thing I want to ask you guys, to me, the tricky game on the schedule, that one that everybody's saying, oh, they're going to win that one, to me is Washington. And I'll tell you why. I understand that they are retooling, but you got Jed Fish there who knows what he's doing on offense. They're going to have a quarterback. And they've won one time out there, guys, in an actual road game against one of those West Coast teams in our lifetimes that I remember anyway, Karsch, and it was 1989. Doug Skene was on that team. Did you make that trip when J.D. Carlson, after Veda Murray took the onside kick?
I was at UCLA. I was in that interior offensive line. That was the famous. That was the famous moment of that year for me. I was standing next to Everett, and the hash we were on. They loaded up the A gap where I was, and I was like, "Oh God, just get my cleats in the ground." And the kick went up, and it was good. But yeah, it's easy for us to sit here and go, "Oh, what's the big deal going out west?" It's just something about it. It's a long flight. They're going to Washington, so the climate may be different. Going to Southern California was definitely different. It was hot and steamy out there. But looking at this schedule right here, it's their first road game. And it's going to be rowdy out there at Washington. It always is. It will be a challenge.
Karsch?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've made the prediction on the air that over the course of time, the travel is going to kill the Pac-12 teams that are joining the Big Ten. It is tough to do. And they're going to have to do it multiple times a year. Big Ten teams, traditional Big Ten teams, aren't going to have to go out there. I mean, when you go out there twice, it's going to hurt. But as much as those teams are going to have to travel, I just think if I were a fan of Oregon or Washington or USC or UCLA, I'd feel very grim about the futures of our programs, especially when you're recruiting kids from your footprint in California along the West Coast, and those parents are going to hear, well, here's where you got to travel for half of our games.
It's tough.
I think it's really, really tough on them, but it's a short-term financial windfall, which seems to drive everything these days. We'll see if it is long-term as well.
It's all about money. Doug Karsch, the voice of Michigan football. I appreciate it. Doug Skene, the self-proclaimed champion of the 1989 game for holding his ground on J.D. Carlson's field goal. I appreciate it. So, guys, thanks a ton. And hopefully we can do this again before the season starts. And I promise not to call you clowns.
Well, thanks, Balas.
You bet.